Hey everyone! Okay, so for my second video, I'm gonna get to the ever so hot topic, or at least it seems to currently be a hot topic, sex versus gender. And what is sex? What is gender? And how many genders are there? So let's dive right in, I guess. So, sex versus gender. Well, first off, what is sex and what is gender? You gotta define your terms. Okay, so sex, according to Google anyway, either of two main categories, male and female, into which humans and many other living things are divided on the basis of their reproductive functions. Merriam-Webster defines sex as either of two major forms that occur in many species and are distinguished respectively as female or male, especially on the basis of their reproductive organs and structures. The third aspect, gender. Let's get to the definition of gender, shall we? According to Google, gender is the state of being male or female, typically used with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. So that's still constraining, that's still sticking to the binary view and biological reductionism there, like it's just male and female, but it's kind of getting in a different way, getting away from that because it's saying social and cultural differences, and that's all very relativistic and subjective. Merriam-Webster defines gender as the behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one or the other sex. Oxford Dictionary defines gender as either of two sexes, male and female, especially when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. The term is also used more broadly to denote a range of identities that do not correspond to established ideas of male and female. So, it's not so simple and black and white as sex. So, the American Psychological Association goes on to define gender as referring to the attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that a given culture associates with a person's biological sex. So, basically, what is one assigned at birth based on, based on their genitals, what they happen to have been born with. So, how are they assigned, and then what roles does society assign to them based on the genitals that they happen to have it? Where is that coming from? It's getting the gender roles are based on that binary view that it's one way or the other, and that if you have male genitals, you have to behave this way, and you have female genitals, you have to behave that way, and you have to go into these certain roles. Of course, nowadays there is so much more flexibility there, especially in the Western world, but things it's still very constrained, I would say, in general, in terms of what is socially acceptable. So again, the American Psychological Association defines gender as referring to the attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that a given culture associates with a person's biological sex. So that's all very vague and subjective, right? Attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. And behavior that is compatible with cultural expectations is referred to as gender normative. Behaviors that are viewed as incompatible with these expectations constitute gender nonconformity. The American Psychological Association then goes on to to differentiate sex and gender by saying sex is assigned at birth, refers to one's biological status as either male or female, and is associated primarily with physical attributes such as chromosomes, hormones, prevalence, and external and internal anatomy. Gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, attitudes, activities that a given society considers appropriate for boys and men or girls and women. These influence the ways that people act, interact, and feel about themselves. While aspects of biological sex are similar across different cultures and aspects of gender may differ. Sorry, that isn't written well. I'm sorry. While aspects of biological sex are similar across different cultures, many aspects of gender may differ. Various conditions that lead to atypical development of physical sex characteristics are collectively referred to as intersex conditions. So, while operating under these definitions, how many sexes are there? Well, 2. 2 biological/assigned at birth sexes, plus genetic anomalies in the case of intersex people. But how many genders are there? Well, it's much more subjective than sex, and it depends on what definition or perspective you are operating under. Under the popular societal or conventional gender/gender role model based on, well, let's be honest, sexist, patriarchal, and gender normative society, there are only 2, plus one amorphous blob for all who just don't fit in. So, in that case, he or she. This is also known as the biological reductionist view of gender. In the non-binary /agender /genderqueer /genderfluid perspective or camp, which is that of a holistic personal self-identified psychosocial, cultural, or spectrum view of gender, well, just as bisexual or pansexual people can relate to sexuality as on a spectrum, there are a lot more possibilities with gender identity as well than just 2. In contrast to, quote, gender essentialism, in contrast to that, which is that, that biological reductionist type view, in contrast to gender essentialism, that first view, i.e. only 2, but maybe with a little wiggle room under the conservative view, there is also the second view of gender diversity, or a psychosocial cultural view of gender, which can be further lumped into 2 camps within the anti-biological reductionist view of gender. The first camp says one gender, says, oh, there should just be one gender. Or gender is just a system. Under the view that gender is purely a social construct that upholds a hierarchical, sexist, patriarchal, gender normative system of society. But some radical feminists then leap to the conclusion that TERFs do. TERFs, or trans-exclusionary radical feminists, are radical feminists that believe in the view that gender is just an oppressive system. Yes, that's what they believe. But they also believe that trans women are not women because they don't see them as valid. Or trans women are just reinforcing the patriarchy /sexism and or the binary view of gender identity. Or making a harmful caricature of women in antagonism to the TERF view. The other camp that subscribes to this holistic view of gender says that there are many or potentially infinite genders under the liberal feminist or postmodern or liberal /leftist, but not necessarily feminist, but also not necessarily anti-feminist camps. The thing is, we aren't just being postmodern, post-truth SJWs when we say things like trans women are women or there are more than 2 genders. Gender is not a biological reality that can be simplified into just two categories. Even biological sex is not constrained to just two. What about intersex people? I mean, granted, that's a rarity. Less than 1% of the population is indeed intersex. But still, even that is not as black and white as they would like you to believe. These right-wing or, biological reductionist type people. Gender is not a biological reality. Sex, however, for the most part, is. And last time I checked, it's actually the RWNJs, or right-wing nut jobs, who are being absurdly post-truth with their views. For instance, that black people do not face systemic injustices and inequalities, and they just need to commit fewer crimes or work harder. Or that the gender pay gap under the conventional two-gender model anyway, isn't real, or that abstinence-only sex ed works. Or take more black and white physical science examples. It's right-wing nut jobs that claim that evolution is just a theory. Well, spoiler alert, it is a theory, but that doesn't mean it's wrong, and that's not the same as saying, quote, just an opinion if you know, even the first thing about science. And that creationism is equally plausible or valid. Or that climate change isn't really happening, or that it's not due to human activities. So, right-wing trolls and pundits have come down with a very bad case of pot calling the kettle black, and choose to seize on a very tiny, albeit important, subset of issues that happen to have a lot of gray area and subjective experience interwoven within it, in order to claim that lefties are the real anti-science, my feelings wankers. Now, if you're interested, I also included a brief description of my theoretical conception of different aspects of gender and sexuality, and how it actually leads to, believe it or not, thousands or potentially infinite combinations. It's down below in the comment box. I just didn't want to go too much into it at length and make a super long drawn out video. I just didn't want to include all that in this video, but it's there in the comment box if you're interested. But I just wanted to comment that these things, sexuality and gender, are not the same as personalities or lifestyle choices. They mean very different things. These are characteristics of people that are all valid parts of different people's identities and life experiences. And neither to be gay, nor to be trans, nor to be pan, nor to be non-binary are, quote, lifestyle choices. That's a bad assumption that leads to dangerous territory and can potentially add fuel to the fire of bigots. So these states of being are just are the way that different people are. They just are. And they deserve respect and compassion, not shame, judgment, and discrimination. Now, on to the subject of pronouns, shall we? Well, gender pronouns, that is. Okay, pronouns other than he or she, which are obvious and you already know those. I'm assuming you do, if you speak English anyway. So there is an increasingly well-known third pronoun for non-binary people, or just a gender-neutral, or general gender-neutral pronoun, and you may or may not know about it. It's they, or them, or their, and self. Another option for non-binary people is Z, or Zim, or Zer, self, spelled with either an X or a Z, however you want to do that. Or hen, or hens, or hen self. That's kind of under the Swedish model of that explanation of non-binary. And a somewhat informal but respectful and salutary option for anyone, binary or not, whether sex/gender is known or could not be known, And that would be, that could be Hess, or Herm, or Here's self. Or to describe an agender deity, potentially, if you believe in deities. And one or one's or oneself as a more abstract version of Hess or Herm or Here's. And oneness or divine oneness can be a name for a pantheistic or panentheistic god. Being can also describe anyone, human or non-human. And person or being can describe any human or non-human sentient animal in general. Just sentient animal. They could even be asexual potentially. But beyond that, they could be anywhere on the spectrum of gender or, agender. It. Now let's talk about it. Let's talk about some inappropriate pronouns. It, or he, she, or things like that. Those are never acceptable, at least when the subject is any sentient being, especially if the subject is a human person and it's just part of polite conversation to, actually use their pronouns. It is only acceptable for inanimate objects or a non-sentient, non-human, or non-human beings. Sorry. Inanimate objects or non-sentient, non-human beings. That's what I was getting at. When said animal does not have a clearly defined sex, or the sex of said being does not matter or is unknown or is unknowable. Otherwise, for sentient and non-human animals, for sentient human and non-human animals, is what I meant. For sentient, non-human, and human animals, if the being is talked about in the abstract, or if the sex or gender of said being is not clearly defined, does not matter, is unknown, or is unknowable, then a gender-neutral pronoun like they, them, their is encouraged and, only makes sense. Now, these are just guidelines on the usage of pronouns, not rules for which you will inevitably be castigated if you goof up. But please try to use someone's identified pronouns. Please don't be deliberately hurtful, bigoted asshole. The flip side is, on the other side of that is, don't get pissed. Don't get too pissed if you're non-binary and your pronouns are z, zim, zer, and don't exactly roll off the tongue for most of the English speaking humanity or stick in their memory banks. Say your pronouns and you correct people, but don't get too mad if it's something a little bit off the wall like that and catches people off guard, because it's bound to happen. I'm going to pause the video and add more later.